So our first speaker is Danielle Paciera, and she is an integrated nutritionist, which means that her line of work is not necessarily limited to cancer. She could pretty much, if we were all born and they said, oh, you know what, here's your coach for your entire life. Her name is Danielle, and she's going to have you live until 150 by doing all these things. So she spoke recently at one of our provider conferences because we felt that in the whole wellness thing, we needed to address some of the nutritional supportive care type services. So she gave a talk on integrated oncology, meaning integrated nutrition and its pertinence to oncology. And so I'm so thankful for her to come because she came up on the things, and there was like maybe a couple of boringer talks that were a little bit more dense. And then she got up there. I've never seen more people stand up, take pictures of her slides. At the end, when they said, how many questions? The rest of us that were talking probably shouldn't have even been there anymore because they pretty much had all the questions for Danielle. So I said, hey, would you come and maybe modify that talk to sort of a more of a patient type thing, but that it's just a phenomenal talk, but not one that's going to make you feel bad about everything that you ate for breakfast. It's more about sort of the things that maybe are not so commonsensical that we could all integrate into our life. Okay, Danielle.
Thank you, ma'am. Thanks, everybody. That was a great talk that you gave, Dr. Maluccio. Thank you. So what I'm going to do, first and foremost, it's not about what you don't eat, it's about what you do eat. So I'm not going to talk to you about what not to eat, really, kind of. But I want you to really focus on the general concepts. So there's way more that I could possibly talk about in this amount of time. So I have a lot of slides. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on all of them. My goal is to introduce some concepts to you about this approach, integrative oncology in general, but more specifically, integrative oncology nutrition. My hope is that you go back and refer to slides later, and my email is at the end. Please email me and ask me for the handouts, and I have a huge reference list. There are 42 references. I'd love for you to email me and ask me for the references as well. And I'll send that to you, probably a big list of you. And what I want for you to do is to go through this talk with me, but then go read the slides later, because they'll take on a whole new meaning. So, how does it go?
Just point this way.
Okay. No? The big one. That's what I thought I hit. Okay. So the way I'm going to go through it is just generally introducing the concept of nutrition in cancer, but I'm going to kind of compare and contrast what a traditional dietitian does with what an integrative nutritionist would do. And in doing that, I'll talk a little bit about those concepts of integrative oncology. There's one mistake that I cannot speak to any oncology group without mentioning. So I'll touch on that, and I always get, well, will you please address the sugar-feed cancer? So I'll talk about that. But I want to give you an idea of what this looks like in play. And I can't give you a very concrete one. I'm going to give you as much of a concrete one as I can, but everything I do is tailored to the individual. So there's no way for me to get up here and tell you what I do for everybody, because it changes. Just like neuroendocrine tumors are different for everybody, so is nutrition. And then I'll give you some tips that, how many people in here are caretakers? Yeah, I had a feeling. And how many people in here are clinicians that provide care to NET patients and cancer patients of all kinds? Okay, so some of you. So even if you are not a cancer patient, the tips are still relevant. But many of you who are caregivers are going to be faced with, like, I don't know what to eat. What should I eat? So these are some tips that you can use to help people when they're hitting you with questions that you don't know how to answer. So We all need to have a set of tools that we can use in the fight against cancer. Nutrition is one type of tool. It's not one tool. It's like screwdrivers. You know, there are Phillips heads, there are flat heads, and there are different sizes of each. And nutrition is like all of the screwdrivers. And with the set of nutrition tools, you can have phenomenal impacts. You can improve quality of life. That's something drastically compromised in a lot of people who are coming to us with a new diagnosis, but also undergoing the treatment. And we know that 2/3 of people who undergo cancer treatment still have latent effects of those treatments years later. So this can make a drastic difference in that. And when you improve quality of or sense of well-being, you can improve quality of life, not just in the here and now, but for years to come. Another thing that nutrition can do is decrease toxicity by improving response to treatment. And then there are so many other things to be gained. We know that nutrition has a drastic impact when used therapeutically on improving long-term survival and treatment outcomes in many different ways. So, what a traditional dietitian does is kind of look at a list of symptoms and figure out how to address those symptoms. And that's things like alterations in a CBC, or low red blood cell count, low hemoglobin, so anemias, low white cell counts, high insulin or high A1C, high blood lipids from some of the treatments that are given that cause metabolic dysregulation. Obesity can be caused by various different interventions as well. So a traditional dietitian is going to say, okay, well, here's the diet that you need for that symptom. But where they are very helpful is figuring out how to get people around obstacles that are preventing themselves from feeding themselves appropriately. Like the list you see here, a lot of these are side effects from cancer treatments. And one of the worst ones that interferes, I think, is the fatigue. Being so debilitated by fatigue that a person just can't figure out, like, I don't know how to get myself up in the kitchen and make a meal. And so sometimes the choice is not the best one for fighting cancer. Unfortunately, what dietitians do is they focus on calories and macronutrients like protein, carbs, and fat. And they miss the biggest piece of the picture, all of those medicinal compounds in foods that have so much potential in influencing outcomes. All of those vitamins and minerals, the micronutrients, the essential amino acids, the essential fatty acids, because that's where the medicinal compounds are, the medicinal value of food is. So what an integrative nutritionist is, don't get lost here. It's just a mention. An integrative nutritionist is going to look at what's driving those symptoms. So let's treat the cause, not just the symptoms, so it doesn't perpetuate and fester. But they're going to take it a step further, or we're going to take it a step further and look at, well, what are the root drivers of cancer? Which ones pertain to you? And in 2011, Hanahan came out with an article that talked about the 6 hallmarks of cancer. And that's been expanded upon by Hanahan again and again and again. I think the last expansion was 23, so last year. But he also put out an article this year. The article quoted at the bottom of the screen is not the Hanahan article. It's just the one where I got the pretty picture. But if you ask me for that reference list, you'll have a few of those Hanahan articles. So what an integrative nutritionist is going to do is try to target some of those mechanisms driving cancer. But really addressing the symptoms, not just helping overcome them at the time a person is struggling with them, doing everything a traditional dietitian does, but also taking it a step further and trying to resolve the cause. But there are more important things that we focus on. And a good way to put in perspective the difference of what a dietitian versus an integrative nutritionist does is looking at digestive complaints. If a person presents with diarrhea, a traditional dietitian is going to say, okay, let's go get you some Metamucil. But an integrative nutritionist is going to say, well, let's get you some psyllium to help in the here and now, but is it intestinal inflammation? Is it a deranged microbiome? Could you have a zinc deficiency? On and on and on. So again, that's where the cause versus the symptom management comes in. And then we can harness food to help with various aspects of disease progression, symptom management, etc. And we know that every medication, whether it is something given for a side effect, something that a person's already taking, a cancer treatment or a cancer targeted treatment, many of them come with nutritional depletions. And so when those things are depleted, we don't have optimal response to treatment sometimes, because those are the cofactors that drive all of the interactions in the body that keep us functional. So these are some of the things more specifically that we're going to target as integrative nutritionists. The microbiome and the micronutrient status. I've talked a lot about micronutrients. Micronutrients are vitamins and minerals, the essential amino acids, essential fatty acids. The microbiome, who in here is familiar with that term? Some of you. So unless I put on my glasses, I can't see hands like this. You might just do that next time. For those of you who aren't familiar with that term, we have trillions of bacteria, fungus, viral things on our body, in our body. The vast majority of them are in the gastrointestinal tract, more specifically the large intestine, but they exist all over. Collectively, that's the microbiome. Most of the time when you hear people talk about the microbiome, they're going to be referring to the gut microbiome. And that is a very important target because it directs response to treatment in ways that we understand, but in many more ways that we don't even understand. Immunotherapy response is dependent upon the microbiome. For example, many chemo agents don't have their optimal response if the microbiome is deranged. And a deranged microbiome is referred to as dysbiosis. So if I slip and I say that term, that's what it means. So the goal here is not just to get through treatment, because what does it matter if you get through treatment, you feel lousy and you don't really have a life worth living? The goal for us, whether we are in the integrative realm or not, is to have people get through treatment feeling as good as they can, and to add more years because they've gone through treatment. But we love for those years to be worth living. So we want people to not just to survive, but really to thrive in those years that they're gaining by surviving the treatment. And again, nutrition is vital for that. Okay, the biggest mistake. It doesn't matter what you eat, just don't lose weight. It does matter what you eat, and this is a good example of that. So you just see Boost here, but I'm going to speak more specifically to Boost Plus. This was just a nice picture. The circles on the screen are the things that I consider pretty noxious, and the slashes are things that are kind of like label fluff because your body can't use that. So the slashes are forms of vitamins and minerals that you can't really absorb and your body can't use. And the rest of those vitamins and minerals are just sprinkled in such small amounts, they don't really do anything significant in the body. The first two ingredients or two of the first and three ingredients rather, are sugar. I'm going to talk about sugar and cancer in a second, but what you need to know is sugar drives inflammation. And we know that the production of certain inflammatory cytokines drives cancer development, progression, tumor proliferation, etc. So it's not something you want to be dumping in large amounts. One Boost has 360 calories, so yeah, Boost Plus. It can be helpful for helping people overcome that I can't eat hurdle and getting calories in so that they're not becoming so malnourished, but it comes at a cost. There are 45 grams of carbohydrates, way more than I would ever advocate anyone with any kind of disease eat in one sitting. 24 of those, so more than half, are straight from sugar, and there's only 1 gram of fiber. There is some protein, 14 grams, but it comes from manipulated dairy proteins. Those manipulated dairy proteins are known to drive something called IGF-1. It's a hormone known to drive cancer proliferation. So it's not really the most ideal protein. Carrageenan is pretty noxious. It can damage the gastrointestinal tract, especially if it's already taking a hit. And then the oils, those oils create these downstream inflammatory compounds in our body. It's not like they could, they do. So again, not the most ideal. In integrative nutrition, on integrative oncology nutrition circles, we call it cancer juice. But a much better option is this. So one avocado has 240 calories, 13 grams of carbs, so not even half as much carbs, 10 grams of fiber, and the microbiome loves avocado fiber. It's one of its favorites. There are over 20 bioavailable vitamins and minerals, and there are a wealth of anti-cancer compounds in avocados. There was one study that I read about, and I went back and read about it this week to make sure I had it right, but men who ate one serving of avocado a week, that's half of an avocado a week. 1 week, half of an avocado. I mean, a lot of people eat a half of an avocado in a day. Had 15% fewer cancers across the board, and that's primary and secondary. That's pretty impactful. And if you look at the research of food and cancer, this is all over. It's not just avocados. Avocados are pretty potent. So when you support the body like that, and also the microbiome, you have these direct effects from the food, but you also have these indirect effects through the microbiome. So pretty potent. If you made a shake with half of an avocado and some coconut milk, 1 can of coconut milk from Trader Joe's is 660 calories. So half of an avocado, half a can of coconut milk, you're at over 500 calories versus 360. You'll have at least 5 grams of fiber versus 1. If you add a half a cup of berries, you take that up. The carbs, even with the berries, would be at most 15 versus 45. And if you add a scoop of collagen powder, you take the protein at least to 12 versus 14. You get a ton of bioavailable nutrients, all these anti-cancer compounds, microbiome support, and then if you add a few more boosts, you get a lot more cancer fighting potential and even some energy support. The fat in coconut is predominantly in the form of medium chain triglycerides. Well, those are used in malabsorption syndromes, so people who can't absorb fat. They're also used for people with fatigue. So for those of you who are cancer patients, how many of you have struggled with fatigue? For those of you who haven't, how many of you have struggled with fatigue? Yeah, so this is really good for everybody, not just cancer patients. You know, if you're not struggling to get calories in, you may not need as much coconut milk, or you might use it for a meal instead of an ad. If you add cacao nibs or cacao powder, it takes the yummy factor up a lot, and it gives you this little energy boost. Even more medicinal way of adding energy would be that green stuff you see on the screen. It's green tea powder. Green tea is full of a compound called ECGC. It is one of the top 5 compounds for fighting cancer in foods. And then if you add mint, I'll speak to this a lot more, a few times, but those culinary herbs and spices are so rich medicinally speaking. And the mint and the cacao and the green tea and the avocado and coconut are so yummy together. And with the fruit, you get a little bit of that natural sweetness. You don't need to add honey or maple syrup or agave, heaven forbid. Whoops. So, I'm not spending time on this. This is reference. The integrative approach is really precision-based. Everything, like I said, is tailored to each individual's needs. And there are a lot of things that we take into account. And that's what this slide is speaking to. I went backwards. Sorry, y'all. So, does it? Don't get lost here. This is just to say there's this thing called the Warburg effect, and what we know because of the Warburg effect is that cancer cells preferentially use glucose at an exceptionally high rate, and that's because of some of the metabolic dysfunction. That's why PET scans work. It's not so simple as sugar. It's carbohydrates. and it's how they affect the body, specifically the blood sugars and insulin. So when a person has cancer, cancer just drives this low level of insulin resistance. And we know that both insulin resistance and insulin, higher levels of insulin that are staying high for a long time, can drive more malignant phenotypes. And that is because insulin and insulin growth factors activate certain receptors that cause proliferation. Even if that didn't happen, high insulin levels are bad for another reason, because they create this low level of inflammation in the body, and that is a known mechanism of cancer. You see certain abbreviations on here. Those are the things that sugar increases, and those are the things that have been documented as cancer drivers. And then another thing to consider is increased insulin growth factors, especially IGF-1, can interfere with response to treatments. And that can adversely affect prognosis, because if you're, as a clinician, trying to treat somebody and they're not responding, what's going to happen? They're not getting benefit from the treatment. It's not so simple as taking out the carbs. That can be helpful in a short term, but cancer cells are very metabolically active. They're dumpster divers. And if you take away their fuel source, if you don't give them the restaurant meal, they're going to go to the dumpster behind the restaurant, and they're going to start looking for other things to use, be it fatty acids, amino acids. So, is keto good for cancer? Maybe for you, but not for you. For you, it might drive your cancer process to just get active and go. Is paleo good? Maybe for her, but not for you. Is the plant-based diet good? For me, maybe. For you, hell no. It's different for everybody. The bottom line is every food has an impact on you, whether you have cancer or not. Cancer patients have a lot more that they need to consider. So every bite needs to be chosen wisely. Food is either going to help or harm. It's never, ever, ever neutral. If we're talking about cancer, is this thing, the bottom one, the pointer? Food can either help us fight cancer or it's going to feed cancer. Choose very wisely. If a person chooses to eat whole, real, fresh, farmer-provided foods, it's going to lend towards a vital body. And a vital body is one who doesn't just survive, but one who really thrives. Okay, so what does it look like? Again, this is some of what I'm doing behind the scenes, not talking about to patients. And if you look in the literature, the terms that are sometimes used to describe, don't get lost in the words, the terms that are used to describe the mechanisms of cancer pretty much match what you'll find when you look up the research of certain food compounds and their benefits in cancer. So foods, and more specifically the compounds in foods, really target those mechanisms of cancer in many different ways. And what we need to consider is one compound in a food can have multiple targets. So that's pleiotropic effects. But if you consider something like a grape, it's not just going to have resveratrol, it's going to have other things in it too. Pomegranates could have a little bit of resveratrol and a little bit of allergic acid, but also lots of vitamins and minerals, some microbiome-loving polyphenols, and some fiber. So when you put one food in perspective with a whole diet of these fresh, vital foods, you have this like tremendous impact to be gained. And there's so much support in the literature. Research goes back decades. I typed in cancer stem cells and phytochemicals. So for those of you who aren't familiar with the term phytochemical, it's just a fancy word for a compound that has some medicinal value in foods typically of plant-based origin that is not a vitamin, it's not a mineral, it's not a carb, fat, a protein. It's a phytonutrient. It's a plant nutrient. So if you type in phytonutrient and cancer stem cells in PubMed, like I did, you'll have over 15,000 results. That's more than you could probably read in a lifetime, unless you're really obsessive like me and you like to read this stuff a lot. And the top 5 that you'll see mentioned again and again and again are curcumin, ECGC, the one I mentioned, that's in green tea, sulforaphane, resveratrol, and genistein. So I typed in curcumin and cancer and got over 7,000 hits. I typed in genistein and cancer and got over 5,000. I typed in resveratrol and cancer and got over 4,000. ECGC gave me over 2,000, and sulforaphane and isothiocyanates, which are in cruciferous vegetables, gave me over 1,200. Again, a tremendous amount of research. This is not like theory, it's proven science. So when you read those articles, you'll see a few things that are more commonly mentioned, and that's these compounds. And I put the sources of them on the slide. But again, these are not just sourced in one food. They're pretty abundant throughout the plant kingdom. And I talked about that pleiotropic effect. Well, a good way to look at this is if we look at the model of medicinal mushrooms. If you look at that man who was found in the ice like decades ago, he had a little medicine pouch. It was full of mushrooms, among other things. So we've known pretty much since before we were evolved humans that mushrooms have this tremendous medicinal value. And that is very true in the realm of immune modulation, so support of the immune system, helping it work more appropriately. But the research in terms of all of the different ways mushrooms are beneficial is just blowing up. That's why you see mushroom everything on the market. Unfortunately, a lot of those things on the market do not actually contain the active compounds that make mushrooms so beneficial. But what we're finding now in some of the cancer-directed research around mushrooms is they have direct cytotoxic effects. So directly kill cancer stem cells and cancer cells. And some of that is in vitro, but there are clinical trials that have been done and that are underway, and the results are just really, really impressive and phenomenal. So this is one of those reference slides. Email me for it, please. What does it look like? Again, there's no like specific diet. It's different for everyone. There are a few commonalities that we see in the diets followed by the people who are most successfully harnessing the power of foods and using this integrative nutrition-based approach. And that is blood sugar balance, but also balance on the plate, which we'll look at in a second. Balance in terms of making sure there's pleasure coming in too. At least half of what people who are really hardcore about this are doing, the people who are really hardcore about integrating really constructive use of foods, half of what they eat is vegetables at a minimum, at every single meal. Even breakfast, people are getting in vegetables. And those vegetables are very colorful ones too. So those colors, the microbiome loves the colors, just munches them up. And then where you find a lot of that color, you're going to find a lot of micronutrients. So you have some support for the microbiome, and you have a lot of support for the body through all of these compounds and micronutrients. The foundation of whatever diet it is, whether it's keto or paleo or plant-based, they're all anti-inflammatory. And I'm speaking more specifically to an anti-cancer paleo, an anti-cancer keto, an anti-cancer plant-based. Consistent, meaning meals are eaten consistently, so people aren't like eating breakfast at 6 or not at all or at like 11. It's pretty consistent meal timing. And consistent, like not 4 days of the week, but 7. So the microbiome. This is like a reference slide, this one and the next one. All I want to say is the microbiome and the immune system are like 1-to-1. It's like bees and flowers. The immune system doesn't know how to work properly without a good microbiome. The microbiome tells the immune system what to do and how to do it. Just like flowers don't survive very long without bees. And some of the things that the microbiome does, one of the most important ones as it relates to our topics today, is it directs response to treatments. If the gut is off, we may not absorb treatments very well. We may not metabolize them well. And this is not just in the gut, but it's systemically once things are absorbed too. The microbiome doesn't just act in the gut, it acts all over the body. It affects liver function, metabolism in the liver, etc. So just more quotes. The article that is at the bottom contained all of these quotes, and I just thought it said it really well. So please email me for slides and go back and read these. And this quote, I was so excited when I read my slides the first time I made them. I was like, oh, that was such a good quote. And then I thought I should make sure that didn't come from the article at the bottom of the screen along with that picture. And it came straight from the article. But I couldn't have said it better. You know, the microbiome is crucial. You do need to consider it. But when you marry the precision-based model, looking at genetics, looking at individual needs, and harness the power of therapeutic uses of foods, you have these dramatic impacts. And dramatic impacts lead to dramatic outcomes. Dramatic outcomes lead to more dramatic survival rates. So, foods that feed the microbiome, one of those reference slides. Okay, how to do this. Bullet points are going to work way better than meal plans. Can I go a few more minutes? So basically, it's balanced. This is what balance looks like. Diversity is important because a healthy microbiome is a diverse one. And a diverse microbiome can't be such without diversity in the diet. The best way to do that is to eat seasonally and locally, because then you're forced to diversify. Color, 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 color. Everybody should eat 5 colors per meal. Cancer patients more. And cancer patients should take it a step further and include one of those cancer-fighting foods in every meal. But the main goal is to try to shove everything you can in every mouthful. So again, this is more about what you are eating, not what you're not eating. If you're focused on not eating carbs or not eating junk food, are you still getting in the medicinal compounds? You just know what you're not getting in. And then another thing that's really important is this bottom one. These dark green leafy vegetables have so much medicinal value. And there are so many different ways you can work them in. If you really hate them, start with a shake. You can put everything in a shake. Culinary herbs and spices. I can't say enough about that. A little bit goes a very long way. I went back and tried to find the study last night that gave the statistics, but 2 tablespoons or 1 tablespoon of parsley gives you a very therapeutic dose of something called apigenin, and that is a very potent anti-cancer compound. And the research on that is blowing up, and it's been around for a long time, and it's really, really impressive. Almost like, really? So when you vary colors and you use those herbs and you make it really aromatic, you get this level of pleasure that you didn't think was possible. And what happens when we start to eat more fresh, real food, the palate gets recalibrated to taste real food. So when you add different cuts, different shapes, different textures, you can make something so pleasurable. I have people come back to me all the time and say, wow, I feel better than I ever thought I would feel. I feel better than before I even had cancer. And you know what? This is way tastier than I ever thought it would be. I don't even want to go back to the way I was eating before cancer because I'm loving what I'm doing and the way I'm feeling. And I'm not exaggerating. People tell me this all of the time, inside of cancer and outside of cancer. So, I'm going to leave you with this. Well, with a few things. We know that cancer interventions have just exponentially grown and increased over the past few years. In my opinion, the long-term survival, especially that beyond 5-year survival mark, hasn't kept up enough. And there's something missing. This is one of those things missing. So when you harness this, you have dramatic impacts. And what we want is dramatic impacts to have lives worth living after cancer treatment. Remember, everything is going to have an impact on the body. So choose very wisely. It's not neutral. And there is my email address. I'm going to leave you all with that.